The scent was sweet, like roses, soft, inviting, the kind of perfume a noblewoman might wear to a royal banquet or a secret lover's chambers. But in Catherine de Medici's court, sweet smells were not always innocent. Some carried death. You wouldn't see it coming. A quick dab on a letter, a spritz on a glove, a drop on a handkerchief passed between fingers. And then a slow, aching death, the kind that twisted your insides, made your skin turn gray, and stole your breath, one gasp at a time. In the shadows of 16th century France, Catherine ruled not just with power, but with fear. Some said she spoke to demons. Some whispered she had her own team of poisoners, trained killers hiding behind velvet gowns and gentle smiles. But what really made her dangerous was her mind. She didn't need swords. She didn't need an army. Catherine had something far more terrifying: perfume laced with poison. France was a burning mess. Imagine it. 1500s Europe. Kings were dying. Religion was tearing people apart. Catholics and Protestants were at war, spilling blood in the streets. One wrong move, one whispered rumor, and your head could end up on a spike. This was the world Catherine walked into, and she walked in with purpose. She was born in Italy, part of the powerful Medici family, a family with money, influence, and secrets. Lots of them. The Medicis weren't just bankers and rulers. They were survivors. Poison ran through their history like ink through parchment. Orphaned before she was even old enough to talk, Catherine was raised by nuns. She learned silence, obedience, but also how to watch, how to listen, how to blend in even when danger was close. They called her the Little Duchess. They didn't know the Little Duchess would one day bend France to her will. At 14, she was married off to Henry, the second son of the French king. She wasn't beautiful, not in the way kings wanted their brides to be, but she was clever, dangerous clever, and patient. Her husband didn't love her. He loved someone else, his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. Catherine watched from the shadows, waiting. When the king died, Henry became king. Catherine became queen, but still, she was pushed aside, ignored, humiliated. Her husband paraded Diane through the palace, giving her jewels, titles, power. Catherine smiled through it all, but deep down she was boiling. Then Henry died, a freak jousting accident. A splinter of wood pierced his eye during a tournament. Some say it was fate. Others whispered Catherine had made it happen. Poison wasn't the weapon this time, but pain, that was always part of the plan. With Henry gone, Catherine took control. Not openly, not at first, but she had sons, 3 of them, and all 3 would become kings. None were strong, none were ready, which meant Catherine ruled through them. And with that rule came fear. Let's talk about the Flying Squadron. That was the name people gave to her team of beautiful young women, courtesans, spies, seducers. Their job was simple: get close to powerful men, make them talk, make them trust, and if needed, make them die. Catherine trained them herself, picked the most beautiful girls in France, gave them lessons in dancing, speaking, flirting, but also in deception, in death. These girls didn't just wear perfume, they wore poison, perfumed gloves, poisoned letters, lipsticks that burned. These weren't stories made up to scare children. These were real tools of power. Catherine knew how to hide a killer's weapon in plain sight. One of her favorites was a woman named Jeanne, sweet-faced, golden-haired. She looked like an angel. But Jeanne had a trick. She carried a ring with a tiny needle hidden inside, a drop of poison on that needle, and all it took was a handshake, a soft touch on the neck. The victim wouldn't even feel it. Catherine used these girls to spy on nobles, to seduce enemies, to get rid of those who stood in her way. Men would fall in love, and then they'd just fall. One of the most infamous deaths was that of Jeanne d'Albret, the Queen of Navarre. She was tough, loud, Protestant, and Catherine hated her. Jeanne came to Paris to see her son Henry marry Catherine's daughter, Margaret. The two families hated each other, but a wedding could bring peace, or so they said. Catherine invited Jeanne to try on some wedding gifts. A new pair of gloves, they said. soft leather, smelled like roses. Jeanne tried them on. She liked them. She wore them back to her rooms. A few days later, she was dead. Doctors said it was natural, maybe pneumonia, maybe a heart attack. But rumors spread fast. Some whispered it was the gloves, that Catherine had dipped them in a rare poison, one that worked slowly, quietly, a gift of death. Whether that's true, we'll never know for sure, but it fit Catherine's style, elegant, personal, and cruel. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre would become her most horrifying legacy, a moment when all the whispers became screams. It happened in 1572. Catholics and Protestants were at each other's throats. France was a powder keg, and Catherine, she lit the match. It started with a wedding. Her daughter Margaret was marrying Henry of Navarre, a Protestant. The idea was to calm tensions, to bring peace. But Catherine didn't want peace, not really. She wanted control, and she feared the Protestants were growing too strong. So, days after the wedding, in the dark of night, bells rang through Paris, and the killing began. Protestant leaders were dragged from their beds, slaughtered in the streets. The Seine River turned red with blood. Bodies were dumped out of windows. Screams echoed for days. Men, women, children, no one was safe. Catherine watched it all. Some say she planned it, others say she lost control. But the massacre had her fingerprints all over it. Even her own daughter, Margaret, was nearly killed by the mob. Her husband, Henry, only survived by promising to become Catholic. He later escaped, but the scars stayed. After the massacre, people looked at Catherine differently. She wasn't just a queen mother anymore. She was a monster, a poisoner, a butcher in pearls. But she didn't stop. Her enemies kept dying, one by one, quietly, always in strange ways, always after meeting with Catherine. Some said she used a book, a black leather notebook filled with recipes, not for food, but for death. They called it Catherine's Book of Poisons. Inside were instructions: how to mix herbs with snake venom, how to blend scents to hide the smell of rot, how to kill with beauty. No one ever found the book, but stories about it still haunt French history. Catherine's final years were full of ghosts. Her sons died one after the other. Her dreams of a powerful Medici dynasty crumbled. She saw visions, heard whispers, spent her nights wandering the halls, talking to shadows. She died in 1589, alone, hated. Some say her body rotted quickly, that even in death, the poison inside her had to get out. But her legend lived on. The queen who ruled with fear, the mother who used perfume to kill, the woman who turned beauty into a weapon. Because in Catherine's world, nothing was innocent. Not a smile, not a glove, not even a kiss on the hand. And perfume? That wasn't for smelling sweet. It was for dying slow. You have to understand, Catherine didn't see poison as evil. To her, it was a tool, just like a pen or a sword. In a world where men lied, cheated, and murdered to stay in power, she simply did the same, only smarter, quieter, with a drop of oil instead of a dagger. She lived in a time when women weren't supposed to rule. They were ornaments, wives, mothers, background decoration for powerful kings. But Catherine, she rewrote the rules. She didn't scream or shout. She whispered. She plotted. And when she smiled, that's when you needed to run. Her enemies kept underestimating her over and over. And one by one, they paid the price. There was Louis of Condé, a Protestant leader, bold and cocky. He thought Catherine was just a weak widow. He called her a foreign snake. Months later, he was dead, shot through the back. Officially, it was on the battlefield. But before that, he'd been invited to dine with Catherine. The next day, he grew sick. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. Then there was Admiral Coligny. He was close to her son, Charles IX. Too close. Catherine didn't trust him. She thought he was pulling her son away, filling his head with Protestant ideas. So she had him watched, plotted in silence. One morning, Coligny stepped outside. A bullet ripped through his arm. He barely survived. Catherine acted shocked, worried. But behind closed doors, she pushed for something darker. "Finish him," she whispered, "before it's too late." Days later, he was dragged from his room and thrown out a window. His body was mutilated in the streets, and that was the spark that lit the fire of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Catherine didn't waste bullets. She didn't need to. Her real power lay in patience. She could wait years to strike, and when she did, you never saw it coming. Let's talk about the poisons themselves. They weren't like in the movies. No green smoke, no sudden collapse. These were slow killers, hidden in everyday things. Perfume made with belladonna, deadly nightshade, lip balm laced with arsenic, letters dusted with powdered toad venom. The Medici family had a long history with such poisons. In Italy, they called it acqua tofana, a clear liquid that killed slowly. First came the headaches, then the stomach cramps, then came the vomiting, sweating, and finally, death. Doctors couldn't trace it, couldn't prove anything. Victims looked like they died from sickness, and that made it perfect, because no one could point a finger, at least not without risking the same fate. Catherine's perfumer was a man named René the Florentine. He was more than a scent maker. He was a chemist, a silent killer. His shop sat quietly in Paris, filled with sweet oils and deadly secrets. Some said he had a secret lab in the basement, bottles labeled not with names, but with symbols: a snake, a skull, a red rose. People came to him for love potions, skin creams, but some came for more: private needs, for revenge, for power, for silence. René never spoke out loud about Catherine's requests. He didn't need to. He prepared what she asked for, wrapped it in silk, delivered it in boxes carved with gold. The two of them, Catherine and René, were like artists of death. One of the strangest deaths linked to Catherine was that of her daughter-in-law, Elizabeth of Austria. She had married Catherine's son, Charles IX. Sweet girl, very religious, very proper. Catherine didn't like her. Elizabeth began to fall ill after wearing a special necklace, a gift, small rubies set in gold. But behind the stones, a hidden compartment, one that held scented wax soaked in poison. She grew weaker every day, pale, cold. Her lips turned blue, but she never complained. She prayed, smiled, faded away quietly. Her death was ruled consumption, but those who saw the necklace knew better. They said Catherine ordered it made, that René himself built the hidden slot, that it was punishment for being too holy, too soft. That's the kind of death Catherine liked best, the kind that didn't make a sound. But even monsters grow old. Catherine's power started slipping as the years passed. Her sons were weak, sickly. France was breaking apart. People were tired of blood, tired of death. She tried to hold on, tried to make peace, but her enemies were closing in. Her last surviving son, Henry III, was hated. Rumors spread like wildfire that he was too soft, too strange, that he slept with boys, that he dressed in lace. Catherine defended him, fought for him, but he didn't listen, didn't trust her like the others did. One day, a monk snuck into the palace, pretending to carry secret letters. Inside his robes, a knife. He stabbed Henry in the stomach. The king screamed, died slowly, and with him, Catherine's world crumbled. She died shortly after. Some say of old age, others say of heartbreak. Her body was buried without ceremony, without fanfare. A quiet end for a woman who had caused so much chaos. But her legend lived on. Even centuries later, people whisper her name with fear. The Black Queen, they called her. Madame Serpent, the Italian witch. They said her ghost haunted the Louvre, that the smell of roses in an empty room meant she was near. That perfume was her calling card, her warning. Modern historians debate how much is true, how much is myth. But in a way, that doesn't matter, because in the minds of the people she ruled, she was death itself. Catherine de Medici turned power into poison. She made beauty deadly. She ruled a kingdom with lace, with silence, and with perfume. And the scariest part, she never needed to raise her voice. She just needed you to breathe in. You start to wonder, how did someone so feared, so ruthless, end up so alone? It wasn't always like that. There was a time when Catherine was adored, at least in her own eyes, a queen mother who brought elegance to the court. A lover of fashion, of art, she designed gardens, hosted grand parties, wore gowns stitched with silver thread. But beneath the silk, there was steel, always. She believed she was protecting her sons, her family, her bloodline. But at what cost? Catherine didn't just use poison for revenge. She used it to sculpt the future, like a sculptor chiseling away at stone. Only instead of marble, her hands shaped kingdoms, through fear, through death. Every step she took in the palace halls was calculated. Every conversation rehearsed in her head. She memorized faces, studied reactions. She knew who was lying before they even opened their mouths. It wasn't magic. It was survival. The French court was a snake pit, and Catherine was the queen serpent. There's one last story people don't talk about much, maybe because it's too strange, too awful. It happened near the end of her life. They say Catherine built a room, a secret chamber, hidden beneath the Château de Chaumont. Only a few ever entered it, but those who did never forgot what they saw. It was called the Room of Poisons. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves, bottles, vials, powders, some labeled, others not, jars with bat wings, toad hearts, dried roots that looked like twisted fingers, and books, ancient ones, handwritten in Latin, covered in stains. This was her arsenal. The room was her dark sanctuary, her escape. When the world above felt too loud, she came here, alone, breathing in the scent of herbs and oils, whispering to herself. Some say she practiced rituals, lit candles, said prayers not meant for God. One servant claimed to see her one night kneeling before a table surrounded by glass bottles, her face pale in the candlelight, eyes sunken, muttering names. The servant was found dead a week later, drowned in the river, his mouth sewn shut. That chamber, if it ever truly existed, vanished after her death. The doors were sealed, the records erased, the chateau changed hands, but locals still speak of it. On foggy nights, they say you can smell the perfume wafting from the stone walls, sweet, flowery, and wrong. By the late 1500s, France had changed. The wars of religion were dragging on. Entire villages burned, children orphaned, starvation, fear. People were desperate, and Catherine, once a powerful queen, was seen as a symbol of everything wrong. Her own children turned against each other. Her daughter, Margaret, ran away from her husband and started sleeping with rebels. Her son, Henry III, dressed in pearls and surrounded himself with male favorites. Nobles laughed behind his back. Others plotted against him. And Catherine, she tried to hold it together, but her hands were slipping. She wrote letters constantly, pages and pages, to nobles, to priests, to foreign kings, begging, threatening, pleading, all in the same ink. She wasn't just losing control of France, she was losing herself. Some nights she'd wander the palace halls barefoot, hair unkempt, eyes glazed, talking to her dead sons, reaching out to them in the dark, whispering their names. The courtiers said nothing. They watched, pretended not to see. But in whispers, they said the Queen Mother had finally cracked. Still, she wasn't finished. There was one more plot, one final game, a marriage between her granddaughter and a Spanish prince, a chance to bring peace between two broken nations. Catherine planned every detail, the dresses, the banquet, the perfume, but days before the wedding she fell ill. Some say it was pneumonia, others believe it was poison, perhaps even her own. Stored too long, mishandled, she collapsed in her chambers, eyes wide, hands clenched, the sweet smell of lavender on her gown. She died with no final words, no confession, just silence. Her body was supposed to be buried with honor in the royal basilica, but war got in the way. Her coffin was lost, dumped in a storage room, forgotten for years. Rats chewed at the wood, rain leaked through the roof. The queen who had once ruled France through death was left to rot. Years later, when they finally moved her remains, all they found were bones and dust. But legends don't die with the body. Today, you can still find stories of Catherine de Medici whispered in French villages, in candlelit bookstores, in dusty museums, her name etched into old paintings. her eyes watching you from behind cracked glass. In Paris, there's a perfume shop, small, hidden on a crooked street. Some say it sits where René's old apothecary once stood. The door is always open. The air smells of roses and spice. If you ask the right questions, the old woman behind the counter might smile. She might reach under the table, show you a vial, clear, with a silver cap, no label, just a faded snake etched into the glass. She'll say it's just for decoration, a souvenir, but if you uncork it just for a second, you might catch the scent. Sweet, light, almost comforting, and then your throat tightens, your skin starts to itch, your heartbeat skips, but by then, it's too late, just like Catherine always wanted it to be. There's a cruel kind of beauty in Catherine's legacy, not in how she dressed, not in her palaces or her paintings, but in how she controlled a kingdom through shadows, whispers, and slow, unseen death. Her enemies feared her more after dinner than during battle. Even today, the line between myth and truth in her story is paper thin. Some historians say the tales of poisoned gloves and perfumed death are just gossip, just enemies trying to smear a powerful woman. But the timing of the deaths, the patterns, the strange sicknesses, they all line up a little too well. Too many people died too suddenly, too conveniently, too quietly. The pattern is always the same. A visit to Catherine, a gift, a dinner, a handshake, then days later, fever, vomiting, breathing that sounds like drowning, a slow fade into death. And Catherine, smiling softly, dabbing perfume behind her ears, planning her next move. It wasn't just France she touched. Her fear rippled across Europe. In England, Queen Elizabeth I reportedly studied Catherine's tactics, learned from them. In Spain, the Inquisition kept files on her. In Rome, whispers of Catherine's black arts made their way through Vatican halls. She became the model of the Poison Queen, the image burned into every fairy tale villain to come. The cold stepmother, the witch with a mirror, the queen with poison apples. They all owe something to her. But here's the haunting part. Catherine never saw herself as evil. To her, she was doing what had to be done, keeping her family alive in a world ruled by monsters. She didn't invent cruelty, she just perfected it and covered it in silk and roses. What makes Catherine truly terrifying isn't the death count, it's how calm she was about it. How elegant, how emotionless. She didn't scream or gloat. She didn't boast like some bloodthirsty tyrant. She simply acted, quietly, deliberately, with that same cold look in her eyes. A look that said, "I warned you," because in her mind, every betrayal against her deserved punishment. Every disloyal friend earned their suffering, and every drop of poison was justice. Even her children weren't spared from her ambition. She used them like chess pieces, married them off like bargaining chips. Their happiness didn't matter, only their use, their loyalty, their place in her grand design. And when they died, Francis, Charles, Henry, she mourned them, but not like a mother, like a queen losing her pawns. She grieved in silence, wore black, then went back to work. The poison didn't stop with her. Long after her death, those close to her kept the craft alive. René's formulas were passed down. Some of her flying squadron girls disappeared into convents, but others, they became silent courtiers in new palaces, teaching new queens how to kill without raising a blade. Perfume became feared in high circles. Gloves were inspected before banquets. Letters were opened with cloths. Every gift from a rival queen came with the silent question, "Is this the one that ends me?" And that was Catherine's real power. Not just the deaths she caused, but the fear she left behind. She taught the world something no sword ever could, that you don't need to strike loudly to change history. Sometimes all it takes is a scent, a single breath, a kiss on the hand, and a whisper that follows you to the grave. There's something chilling about the idea that a queen could sit calmly at her mirror, brushing her hair, humming softly, while the poison in her ring dried invisible on her fingertips, or that a small satin box tied with a ribbon could carry not just a gift, but a death sentence. That's what Catherine understood. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smells like roses.